Thank you so much to Ajita and to Jean. We're now going to move into about 10 or 15 minutes of questions. Just a reminder to submit the questions at slido.com or through the app. So maybe we can start with our first question. So this question, there's two questions, I think. Will they come up on this screen or just down here? Yeah, okay. So the first, there's two questions that are related to each other, and they're both to Tunnel with Hilaria, a question for you. So maybe if the speakers all want to come up onto the stage, that'd be great. And I'll start. So Hilaria, for student support officers, what can we do when we are working with the parents of queer kids who believe their bigotry is in the best interest of the child? And related to that question is, here we go. Yeah, at what age do I educate my kids about LGBTQIA+ issues so that they are inclusive at school?
Okay. Thank you for that question. I think for the student support officer, what can we do? I think having conversations with them and anchoring to whatever in the United States, we have school districts who have policies and practices, and for the most part, also have anti-discrimination policies. And most school districts have codes of conduct that they sign. In fact, when I was at the school district, I was a diversity and equity inclusion officer at my district. Very often, I would engage in these conversations and the importance for them understanding that our school district has an anti-discrimination, anti-sexual harassment policy. And then when they sign that code of conduct, they sign on to our district's belief that all students have the right for themselves to be in their identities. Some districts may go so far as also having specific sexual orientation or gender identity policies. And so we also advocate through our unionism for our members and our leaders to advocate for those types of policies and school board resolutions to be made. And so very often it is a pincer effect where everyone coming together to make sure our students are able to be their authentic selves in our school buildings. The second part of that question about what age appropriate, my personal belief is that it's always appropriate to talk to our students about who they are and their identities. We also have the opportunity, working with many of our partners and our own work, to recognize that there are ways how you talk to a kindergartner in a high school. Well, no, that's not a good example. How you talk to your children may differ because of child development, but doesn't change the topics that you need to talk about. And so we encourage our members, and we encourage our teachers and educators to have the necessary conversations with age-appropriate references, but to have those conversations.
Great, excellent. So the next question is directed to Jean. Did you receive any support of any international embassies in Myanmar regarding the issues of your LGBTIQA+ community after the coup?
No. Most donors don't allow organization to funnel funds into Myanmar after the military junta. So, no.
And sort of related to that is a theme across the talks, all three of your talks, is the impact of economic insecurity and inequality. What do you think our queer movements can do to address economic inequality? And that's for each of you, if you have thoughts.
I would like to say that this actually it relates well to me, because my politics really lean to probably quite obvious, but I think that the corporatization of Pride has really been quite problematic in recent years, and we've seen that. And we've seen that, even here, as what Emily said, that there are $2,000 tickets for a Bondi party. Well, there are heaps and heaps of trans women in Melbourne who are struggling to make ends meet. And I feel that, as a migrant, it also affects me, because if you look on the telly, watch about LGBT issues, it's always so glamorized, also glitters and whatnot, but that's not the reality that we face. The reality that we face is we get homeless, we get kicked out, we often cannot have food on our plate. But what you see often on telly is rich, powerful people who are using identity of the LGBT community to make capitalism palatable. And I believe that that is disgusting.
Yeah. Nicely said.
I mean, I think drawing upon the work that we do internationally, it obviously varies very much what you can do in different countries. And the kinds of discourses that are possible, what queer movements can do to address economic inequality. I think the reality is that we're doing it all the time. In the absence of having governments that are actually including LGBTIQ in social protection programs or in education or employment, in the absence of other international organisations which are including LGBTIQ people, our organisations default as development organisations. Now we are development organisations, we are humanitarian organisations. Those organisations working in lots of different countries in the region. We can't do it all by ourselves though. So it does involve working with international organisations to help them understand how they can really work with our communities. A lot of the INGOs and UN agencies that we work with are often scared. They're scared of doing the wrong thing. They don't have partnerships with our organisations. They don't know how to work with us. They say they're scared of doing harm, and sometimes that's a real fear. But I think some of it just belies that they actually don't know us, and they haven't taken the time to understand us, and haven't taken the time to develop their own systems and practices in ways that would allow them to engage us safely and effectively. So I think we need to expect a lot more from those organisations, many of which do economic security and equality work. There are so many other actors, business, unions, that we need to build relationships with and solidarity with as organisations and people, but hopefully do that from a position of strength rather than hoping or begging for people to help us out.
I would just only echo what you've already heard, that for our community, for our students in particular, who are often twice or triple marginalized, because if you include a socioeconomic status and their ability to live with an economic freedom, it's important that we recognize their entire struggle, their entire identities, and do all that we can to create public schools and communities that create the resources and the health care, especially in our country where there is not universal health care. So very often those who find themselves more economically depressed often have a lack of health care or access to health care. And then if you consider their LGBTQIA plus identities, they're even more so marginalized. And so it's more important for now, as we address these problems, is to address them as a community and address them and not just single out one thing like education, but we look at a very expansive review of all the things and all the pieces that make us whole and help us for the opportunities and to thrive, whether it's healthcare, education, access to public accommodations. All of those things must be systemically addressed.
Great, thanks. So Emily, could you talk more about how we as individuals can personally rebalance the burden in having to educate and inform others?
Oh, gosh.
Just a simple question.
Simple question.
All the world.
So again, I'll draw upon the international humanitarian and development work that EduEffect does, so we do involve. We work very closely with LGBTIQ organisations and communities in different countries. So we're doing work, for example, in El Salvador at the moment with International Rescue Committee, which is part of the humanitarian response in El Salvador. but we're working with the LGBTIQ CSOs there to actually do a complete and thorough review of what IRC does in terms of its engagement with LGBTIQ people. You know, what kinds of policies does it have? Does it treat us as one group of people, or does it recognise all the differences? What kinds of, when organisations like IRC and many others for that matter do programs for women and girls, do those programs include lesbian, bi, intersex, trans, queer women and girls? So looking at all aspects of those operations. I mean, we can bring our lived experience to the table, but I think we can do a lot more than that. And I think it really is. It's about a shift of power. You know, it's about letting humanitarian and development organisations know that it's actually their responsibility to do better. We can help them with that. You know, we don't have to expect them to do it by themselves. There's a lot that we bring to the table, a lot of experiences, a lot of joys, a lot of ways of doing things well. But we do need those organisations to pick up the slack. And thankfully, some organisations, IRC included, are willing to go down that path, and I hope a lot more do.
So the next question, which might be our last one, is, and I'm going to take host privileges here and expand the question a little bit. But so the question is, how can we stop Australia from hopping on to the anti-LGBTQIA+ bandwagon in schools that the US seems to be on? But also beyond that, how do we address the anti-trans and the gender-critical attacks that are coming, that are in Australia now, that are really, we're seeing very prominent in the US, also in places like the UK? How do we push back against anti-rights forces against parts of our community?
Okay. I think we know that it's coming. The playbook that they're using is the same. One thing we talked about, and I've been in Australia for the last 2 weeks working with Education International, as well as Australian Education Union and New South Wales Teachers Federation on this exact issue. We know what the issues, what they're saying. The one thing we know from our proponents is that they are disciplined with their message. And so part of the work that we're doing is, because we know we have resources that we can use, we have message guidances, but the number one thing we need to do is have the conversations in our communities, at our coffee shops, on our buses, with people that we may not know. Because there's a narrative that is going around that is these tropes about what we as LGBTQ members and the community is trying to do for our students. Whether it's grooming them to become gay or trans, we know that we have to stop those conversations. And the way that we do it is risking and finding the courage to talk about the truth. And so in our country, it's also very intricately interweaved with this attack on public education. Not only are they challenging LGBTQ+ rights, they're also challenging our rights to teach our history. And so what we need to do is have those conversations. Like I said in my presentation, educators are the most trusted individuals in our community. So if you're not an educator, if you're a leader, collaborate with our organizations and have the conversations. Create spaces where people can affirm who they are. But that is what's going to turn the tide for our schools, for our society, right?
I think we really need to track the funding. We need to track the narratives, because they are coming from sources overseas. We need to learn from what's happened in other countries. We need to make sure that we build our alliances. As Victor said this morning, injustice that any of us face is injustice that all of us face, and we must not let them pick us off one by one. Separate our movement. It does pop up from time to time. For example, in sport. For example, recently, I'm really sort of happy that a lot of sports groups in Australia said no, we're not interested in this. And so I actually have faith that in Australia that we might resist this, but we have to be vigilant.
I will just say that this has happened before, like a divide and conquer strategy. It happened with the gays in the 70s and the 80s, and now they're doing it to trans people. What I would say is hold the line, organize, mobilize. It's important because the power of the working class is crucial in the development of our world. And you have nothing to lose but your chains.
Come on now.
Actually, so we have one final, I think it's a really important question, because just to acknowledge that there are, so the question is, the situation of Afghanistan's LGBT people has changed significantly recently. Do you have specific cases of targeted Taliban attacks against Afghan LGBT people to share, acknowledging that there are leaders of the Afghan movement in the room, including the work that ILGA Asia is doing? So I want to give a chance for Jean or others Jean to really respond to that question. Or if there are others who want to respond within the room as well, if there's a...
Is Ajita still on?
Yeah, I'm still around.
Okay, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, sure. So we do know, and there is overwhelming evidence to suggest that digital targeting has definitely had an impact on real-life targeting of LGBTIQ persons. We are not in the position to share any of these stories at the moment because they are extremely sensitive, and we would not be able to jeopardize the safety and security of people on the ground at the moment. There is evidence and research that is accessible at this point, which does indicate that there are horrific instances of violence against people by these actors. I would also like to comment on the question asked before, Dave, if that's okay, very quickly, which is when we're thinking of anti-gender movement, I would also maybe encourage everyone to think of that in a larger framework of anti-rights, because in the Asian context, it's simply not that it just doesn't work in silos like that. What we're looking at is a broad assault on human rights, and several people working on different themes of human rights as well happen to be LGBTIQ and are facing extreme assaults to their safety, freedoms, dignity, and life. So if we're thinking of what we can do as Australia, as the global north, as the community that's in the room today, I would encourage us to think deeply about how we can invest meaningfully in legal reforms, in political reforms in Asia, and think of decriminalization in more than one way, and truly invest in understanding the kind of challenges we face and understanding the kind of resources we need to carry out our work in a safe manner. Thank you so much.
Great. And please keep clapping, and a round of applause for thank you so much to our four speakers. Thank you.